Bonjour, bonjour mesdames et messieurs. Je m'appelle Mehrdad Hariri et je suis PDG et président du Centre politique sur sciences politiques canadiennes. J'ai le plus grand plaisir de vous accueillir à la CSPC 2020, cette séance plénière pré-conférence, une discussion entre trois chefs de la science au Canada et aux États-Unis. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mehrdad Hariri and I am the CEO and President of the Canadian Science Policy Centre. It is my utmost pleasure to welcome you to CSPC 2020 and this pre-conference plenary session, the fireside chat between three leaders of science in Canada and in the US. I want to thank the organizers of the panel, the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C. and Canadian Consulate in Los Angeles, for putting this magnificent panel together for a very important discussion for us today. I also want to thank Global Affairs Canada, who have been very engaged with the CSPC this year and not only helped to promote the conference among the international community, but also actively engaged with content development and panel organization of the conference. The US is our top partner in international scientific collaborations and exchange, the highest level of scientific collaborations that we have, joint publications, exchange of researchers, in addition to innovation partnership in many fronts. Of course, this is no surprise given the fact that we are neighbors with a very long borders and many cultural and historical in common, and political and strategic alliances, and US is our closest partner, and we're like a family, in fact. Given the special year and the impacts of the pandemic, we would like to know the landscape of science in the two countries and address the importance of good public policy in maintaining research excellence, the increasing need for open science and multidisciplinary collaboration in responding to global crisis, the role of science in helping to diminish socioeconomic inequality, and science communication for building public trust. For that discussion, please let me invite the panel host and moderator, Dr. Mona Nemer, our Chief Science Advisor, who needs no introduction from me. Dr. Nemer is a biochemist and served as the Vice President Research at the University of Ottawa for 10 years, and appointed to the role of Canada's Chief Science Advisor in September 2017 to provide advice to the Prime Minister, the Minister of Science and Innovation, and to the Cabinet on issues related to science and government policies. And her mandate was just renewed last month for another 2 years. Thank you, Mona, for joining this session and leading this session. Then we have Dr. Sethuraman Panchanathan, Director of National Science Foundation. As he refers to his name, Dr. Punch is a computer scientist and engineer and the 15th director of the U.S. National Science Foundation. He served as executive vice president of the Arizona State University Knowledge Enterprise, where he has also founded the Center for Cognitive Ubiquitous Computing. Prior to becoming director of NSF, Punch served on National Science Board for 6 years and has also served on and chaired numerous high-level research and innovation organizations. He is a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and other prestigious science and engineering organizations. Welcome to CSPC, Dr. Punch. And last but certainly not the least, Dr. Sudip, Parikh, Chief Executive Officer of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and Executive Publisher of the Science Family of Journals. Sudip has spent 2 decades at the nexus of science, policy, and business. Immediately prior to joining AAAS, Sudip was Senior Vice President and Managing Director, leading strategy in the Americas at the IA Global, a neutral, multidisciplinary organization bringing together regulators, industry, academia, and patients. Interestingly enough, he has a science advice background. From 2001 to 2009, Sudip served as senior science advisor and professional staff to the United States Senate Appropriations Committee. He is a molecular chemist by training. Thank you all for joining this panel, and thank you, Sudip and Punch, especially for coming to CSPC for the very first time virtually. We know both Sudip and Punch are new in their positions, in fact, less than 12 months in their positions, and we are very happy that we are able to have you early on your mandate so that we can keep getting you back to the conference. And since you are the first timers to CSPC, and so maybe some of our participants from the US, let me quickly add that Science Policy Center is a nonprofit and non-advocate organization operating at the intersection of science, policy, and society to convene and connect various stakeholders of science, innovation, and policy, and to build capacity for the next generation of science policy experts. The annual conference is the biggest operation and attracts policymakers, researchers, executives of science enterprise, nonprofit and private sectors from across the country, and increasingly from the international community. And since Sudip is here, let me add that the annual conference inspired by the annual AAAS meeting, and I'm saying this as the founder, and let me add that we look up to AAAS to learn and adopt models, and I'm a big fan of what you do. With that, I would like to invite Mona to start off the conversation. You are the host and moderator of the session. I disappear from the stage. We'll be back for the Q&A session. Merci beaucoup and thank you.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Mehrdad, et bienvenue à tous à cet échange, à ce dialogue-là avec mes collègues distingués des États-Unis. So thank you, Mehrdad, and welcome everyone to this virtual fire chat. I did, however, sit by the fireplace, you know, just to make it look a little bit real, but just so grateful for technology that can unite us, you know, under these difficult conditions right now. So as you heard, we have with us Dr. Panchanathan. We're going to call him Panch. He's agreed to it. And he is the director of the U.S. National Science Foundation, known to everyone as NSF. And we also have Dr. Sudip Parikh, and he has also agreed to go by Sudip for the Canadian and the U.S. Friends here. And you heard that Sudip is the CEO of the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So we will be talking today about their experiences and expertise with the U.S. science landscape, with the international science landscape as well. And we will discuss opportunities to further enforce the Canada-U.S. collaborations in science advice, and in science communication. Of course, it doesn't, escape anyone that there was an election in the U.S. So I think this is an extremely opportune time as well to welcome our colleagues and discuss the perhaps other challenges and opportunities going forward. As you heard from later, we will take a question from the audience. So if you'd like to ask and put your questions. So I'm going to start with your Panch, and perhaps I'll start by saying that you and I actually share an academic alliance. We come from different fields of science, but share a university here in Canada. And I wonder if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about this and about your time in Canada.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nemer. It's wonderful to be with all of you here. Wonderful to be with Dr. Parikh and yourself. And thank you, Mehrdad, for introducing the session. You know, my years in Canada, I recall very fondly. Those were the formative years for me. I did my PhD at the University of Ottawa, and then I continued on to be a faculty member at the university. I had the privilege of also, being part of two centers of excellence, the Telecommunications Research Institute of Ontario, as well as a Federal Network Center of Excellence called the Canadian Institute for Telecommunication Research, CITR. So through that, I had excellent experiences that essentially set the stage for me in terms of how to work across disciplines and how to advance fundamental research, but at the same time impacting humanity and society. I also had the wonderful privilege while I was at the university to skate in the canal, which I remember very vividly in my head, as an impressionable experience. We had our two children. I met my wife there. And so overall, it was a wonderful experience in Canada before I moved to the United States. and it has been a wonderful, wonderful journey from a science technology perspective. So delighted to be here again. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, I can see how you were, I could just see you going out of the engineering building and on the canal, and it's of winter. That must have been something. So, Dr. Or rather, Sudip, we too also share a lot in common. Actually, we're both biochemists. You were a science advisor, you know, the ropes. So, can you just like perhaps you know, give us any perspective on what it's like to be a scientific advisor to governments?
Yes, well, thank you, Mona. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and thank you to Mehrdad, and thank you to Panch. This is really a superb panel. I can't wait to have this discussion. I've been looking forward to it all day. Being a science advisor to the Senate Appropriations Committee, as a biochemist, and Mona, I was not nearly as successful a biochemist as you are. Coming to it from being a biochemist, I didn't know what the word appropriations meant. And what I came to learn very quickly is that appropriations means spending money. And what I eventually decided was that money is policy, funding is policy, and that we as scientists had to make sure that we were advocating for funding and proving our value to the society who is putting so much funding and so much investment into us. And that we had to be able to make that connection, whether it's through awe-inspiring science or whether it's through practical applied outcomes for the economy. We had to be able to make both those connections and make them clearly. And I know that you share that vision and share that ability. So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And you know, spending money is actually you know, good, but spending it right is even better. So it's a great privilege to be able to weigh in on that. So, Panch, you haven't been, as Mehrdad said, you came in your role recently during the pandemic. Very welcome for you. So, can you tell us a bit more about your work in the past few months at NSF, and if you needed to focus or refocus on specific things?
Thank you again, Mona. You're absolutely correct. This has been very interesting times, challenging times, one could say. But at the same time, I'm a person who believes that challenges do present at the same time opportunities. So for me, therefore, the last few months since I have taken this role, I have spent a lot of time, of course, thinking through what might be the vision for the future will be, and engaging with as many audiences that I can so that I might talk about the vision, get feedback, and shape the vision even better. So that's something that I've been doing. At the same time, as we are trying to address this pandemic and seeing what we can do to be of assistance to our universities who are facing tremendous challenges and students who are facing challenges, how might we be helpful to them so that they might be successful in their endeavors and careers and so on. At the same time, as trying to see how we might engage in projects that can actually help address and solve some of the issues faced by the pandemic. As you know, this pandemic has also opened up opportunities, as I said, to virtual education and learning opportunities that probably would have taken much longer to become fruitful. But now, because of the fact that we had to do it within a few weeks, configure ourselves, it has given us opportunities to be more creative, more bold, more risk-taking, and through that, we have been able to solve some fundamental problems to make it all real. So that is also a huge part of that. And last but not least, this has also shown us that a global pandemic means that we need global solutions involving global expertise, which means that it has even more emphasized the importance of global collaborations. As you know, Mona, you and Alejandro Adam, the head of NSERC, you are all wonderful partners from Canada. You're doing amazing work in Canada. And therefore, how might we partner with you and others across the globe as we attempt to find creative solutions as we navigate this challenge? So all of this are the kinds of things that I've been thinking about, moving the agency forward into the future with great intensity, at the same time addressing the current challenge with great intensity. So thank you so much.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is music to my ears to hear you talk about the collaborations, and we are going to get to them. Of course, when we talk about U.S. Canada, we take each other's almost granted, right? Someone like me, I trained in the U.S. back and forth. I was there, and actually, almost half of my students are working in the U.S. or training in the U.S. right now. So we are joined at the hip. And Sudip, I recall so well last February in Seattle when we met face to face. The world was different. It was the beginning of the pandemic, and my goodness, how things have changed since then. We talked about the opportunities and challenges for researchers, for doing science, but also publishing science, communicating science has been, incredibly a new game during this pandemic. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mona, it seems like a world away, that time in February when we were able to meet in person, with 6,000 people in one place. It feels like the before times, not the during and after times. The world did change very quickly. Our priorities didn't. We want at AAAS, our priorities really continue to be the same, but their urgency has increased even more. As Panch said, there are opportunities born of tragedy. We believe very firmly in scientific communication that is clear and crisp and understandable, and that is valuable both to scientists and to the lay public. That has not changed. We believe very clearly in science by all and for all. What I mean by that is science that is done by a diverse group of individuals and that is for the diversity of the United States and the world. And that has not changed. And finally, we believe in the need to invest more heavily in the sciences, and we believe that has not changed. What has changed is that what we realized during this time is that paradigms can shift on a dime. And this is something that is really incredible. For the longest time, we found it very hard in the United States to support telehealth, to support reimbursements for telehealth. And then in the flip of a switch, we were able to make it happen during this pandemic. And what that told us is that these opportunities born of tragedy must not be wasted. We must make sure that that we are pulling together this sense of urgency, building our rationale for all the urgency that we have for those 3 points I talked about: growing science investment, better science communication, and increasing diversity in the sciences. On science communication, our journal, Science, gets about 4 million hits a week now. That is just a huge number, double what we saw before the pandemic. And what that means is our audience is no longer just scientists, and we need to be thoughtful about that. We need to make sure that when we are writing something that is on our news pages, that when a non-science journalist reads it, that they can understand it. We need to make sure that we are communicating in context, because a scientific paper with the jargon that is required for precision does not lend itself to science communication. We have to get better at that and better at that. We're still on a journey there. We haven't perfected it yet.
Well, thank you very much. And I also want to thank you because, the Science magazine and yourself were among the first to make COVID-19 publications and data openly accessible to all. And I think it's been a game changer in terms of management of the pandemic. So thank you for that. Now, to both you and Panch, I want to ask the question, I guess, on everyone's mind. After the election and when a new government, a new administration arrives at the White House, how does that affect your work and your organization? I just like maybe a little bit on that situates, your organizations relative to the administration. I think would be good. So, Panch, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Mona. So, as you know, like in Canada and other countries, science, technology, and engineering are I would say bipartisan or even post-partisan, if you want to think of it that way. I think in the United States, there is tremendous enthusiasm. As I have gone through my confirmation process and walked the hills of the of Congress and met with a number of senators and their staffers, I've realized that this support for science is universal. People understand that science is an exceedingly important thing for the prosperity of the nation, for societal prosperity as well as economic prosperity. So given that, there is tremendous support to advance the aspirations that we have at NSF and across the nation. And for example, I will tell you, when we look at this moment in time, we all can recognize the fact that there's tremendous talent in our countries that still need to be brought to the forefront in order that we might inspire them, motivate them, engage them from all across the nation, whether it is urban, rural, east, west, heartland, wherever that might be the talent that are there. We need to make sure that we redouble our efforts to ensure that we are inspiring the talent and bringing them to life. So that's something that all of us feel is exceedingly important for the future of the nation. We do believe that therefore domestic talent at scale and strength, as well as global talent at strength and scale, can only make this nation richer, better in terms of outcomes. So that's the first thing that we all can agree on. And in terms of the actual impact that science and technology has in terms of the societal prosperity, there is no question. You take any challenge that we face, whether it is water, whether it is anything to do with the transportation, whatever you want to take as a challenge faced, all of those can be addressed in a positive way through only advancements in science, technology, and engineering. And I want to be very careful here when I say about science, it is the broadest form of thinking about science. Social sciences, behavioral sciences, economic sciences, as well as the physical sciences, engineering, technology, all of them coming together in finding creative solutions and innovative solutions. We also know that such a vibrant environment is what is going to generate the future industries that we need in order for us to be in the vanguard of prosperity. And therefore, that's also something that we can all agree. So I believe that we are only going to accelerate progress in order that we can benefit the broad base of humanity and society across this great nation. And I'm sure that is true all across the globe. And therefore, I believe the future for science, technology, engineering, I would say, is very vibrant, is exciting, and NSF is deeply committed to ensuring that we are part of that vibrant future. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. And Sudip, like I said, you guys have been in the midst of a lot of science communication and publishing and everything. But maybe you can just tell us a little bit more, what happens when there are changes in administration, what's the impact and so on.
Sure. Thank you, Mona. I agree with Panch 100%. There is tremendous bipartisan support for science in the United States. The change at the and as I believe is true that Vice President Biden is now the president-elect of the United States. It does have changes in some policies. Some of those are related to our international collaborations. Vice President Biden has said that he would reestablish our collaborations with the WHO. We also can imagine that there would be changes to some of the immigration policy that has been put into effect over the last couple of years. As AAAS, we see a lot of support for science in Congress from both sides. We have argued very strongly that we need to have domestic scientists, and as Panch said, we have to be able to invest in our scientists around the country, whether it's on the coasts. We can't have all of our scientists coming from Boston and Palo Alto. We must have scientists coming from the middle of the country as well. We also argue that the United States and Canada has this exact same role of being a crossroads for the world of talent. And we need to make sure that we are open to that and welcoming to that talent. And that message comes from the top. And our message has been muddled over the past couple of years. And I think that's about to change. And that is going to be very welcomed because as AAAS, we maintain these collaborations worldwide, regardless of which administration is in power, which party is in power. And it will be wonderful to see that welcoming message coming from the top again, because it is critical. It is critical looking at this panel. We see that we are the beneficiaries. Our two countries are the beneficiaries of a crossroads of talent. We draw from everywhere, and that has been vital to the economy. It's been vital to the health, and it's been vital to the security of our nations. And I don't think that's going to change. I think it's only going to get better. So I agree with Panch. I think the future is very bright.
And Mona, if I could add, I would say that the current COVID pandemic has shown all of us how important science is in order for us to be able to address the current challenge that we are facing. In fact, you could think of it as it's given a boost to the importance of science. You know, I think Sudip was saying that too, that the current environment has only underscored the importance of science. And when he says 4 million people are looking at the Science magazine on a weekly basis and that there are non-scientists, that tells you that people really believe that science is a way in which we can solve global problems. So that's very exciting to have that kind of endorsement even more than ever before.
It is.
No, I agree with you completely, but you know, on the lighter side, because you both mentioned that we need talent everywhere in the country, including in the Midwest. Hello, I did my undergraduate degree in Kansas, so and yes, there is science everywhere in the U.S., not just on both coasts. So just like to put it in there. So French. You know, look, you're going to be under actually a lot of pressure because the public wants science, and because I think the politicians also want more science because they want more innovation, and they are linked together. So you spoke about, you know, the opportunities offered by the pandemic, and you know, how easy is it to focus and refocus? I wonder if you can just like maybe ask a little bit about, you know, your vision and you know, what you'd like to embark on in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you, Mona, again. Basically, if you look at this opportunity that is presented before us, what we have learned is the following things: that, you know, we have to accelerate the progress of science. We have learned that. And so, you know, one of the pillars of my vision for NSF as we move forward is how do we advance the frontiers of science? That's one pillar. The most important pillar, which I emphasized even before, is what I call, in doing so, we have to ensure inclusivity and accessibility so that scientific talent can be inspired across this great nation. So that's very important. In the United States, for example, what I call as missing millions of talent who are not being able to connect themselves to scientific opportunities, we need to change that. And that requires an intentional approach to be able to address that. And the third pillar is what I call global science leadership. This kind of conversation, I find it is happening more and more. In fact, this day started for me early in the morning at 6 a.m. with a call with the global science advisors from various countries, including yourself, Mona. So it shows to me these kinds of things would not happen, but for the fact the pandemic put it front and center, that these global collaborations and global convening of ideas and people can really help really solve fundamental problems and therefore contribute to humanity. And then these three pillars underscored by what I call the foundation of partnerships. Because I truly believe that what is required for us to do is to engage with partnership in every form, in every type, in every mode. That is, whether it is inside the great agency of National Science Foundation, or with other agencies, or with industry, or with foundations in philanthropy, who do a lot of work, by the way, in advancing the prosperity across the nation. How do we work with them? Working with cities, state, working with K-12, working with community colleges, working with universities, and working with international partners. So all of these partnerships are really going to leverage what we are doing at NSF, and therefore what NSF can leverage by virtue of the partnership to do even more. And I call it strengthening at speed and scale that can be accomplished. And as you rightly said, there is this thread of innovation that then gets inspired inside the agency and therefore across the nation, because we need to be a lot more innovative and risk-taking. In fact, the founding of NSF was Vannevar Bush's fantastic conceptualization called the endless frontier. And he said, high risk, high reward ideas that needs to be unleashed across the US and research enterprise. And that's what is required for us for the future. Now, in doing so, therefore, one of the things that I keep talking about is you have the exploratory research, which NSF is doing an outstanding job in. If you just look at the Nobel Prizes 2.5 weeks ago, all the Nobel laureates in physics, chemistry, as well as in economics, were people that were funded by NSF, either at their early stage of careers or through their careers. And so for us, we take pride in the fact that NSF makes possible this unleashing of ideas and potential and talent across this nation that achieves the highest form of outcomes like the Nobel Prizes through exploratory activities. But at the same time, I talk about translational activities that NSF is also making happen, whether it is through the entrepreneurial programs or the programs in partnership with industry or other kind of partners. I call them translational programs. To me, the exploration and translation, you can think of them as the double helix, which then mutually reinforces each other, and that becomes the DNA of NSF, if you want to look at it that way, right? That both are exceedingly important. You think of how exploration makes translation possible, and translation is not just an outcome of exploration, but translation also inspires exploration. And therefore, it is just like this weaving of going up in the upward spiral. And you can see many, many examples of that in Canada, of course, in the United States, and across the globe. All our scientists find these unbelievable innovations that then makes possible cures, makes possible launching of companies, makes possible solving problems like how do we get portable water to every part of this nation? How do we ensure that the air quality is of the highest level that we can have across this nation? All of these aspirations that we have are made possible because of the fact that we have this nice interspersion of exploration and translation that moves the scientific technology enterprise forward. So I'm very excited, as you can see, that the future is very bright through these outline of these activities that I think we can not only have a great impact in the great state of the United States of America, but also across this globe, because it's very clear to me from this conversation, as recent as this morning, that the time and the environment for partnerships is as rich as it has ever been. And I'm so thrilled by that. Thank you.
And Panch, if I could add to your statement. Oh, quick.
Well, we can see how excited you are, for sure.
Mona, just to add to Panch's excitement, he's not the only one, right? Panch has raised that expectation amongst Congress.
Yes, absolutely.
Congress is excited by this vision of pulling together discovery and translation, to the point that there are bills in the Congress put forward by relatively senior members of Congress that want to triple the budget of the National Science Foundation. And I think that's testament to the fact that there is not just scientific excitement from us as scientists, but excitement from policymakers who see investments in science as the road to better health, better security, and better economy.
Yes, and we love to see increases in investments in sciences anywhere. I think that we're all holding hands and working together on that. So they talked a lot about ensuring inclusivity, accessibility of to research, how vital it is in building public trust. Tell us a little bit how AAAS makes this happen, or your intention of increasing as well any gaps in invisible minorities, in the contributions of women to both science and science communication.
It's such an important question. What we have seen, and you see it even in the pandemic, that trust matters. And a lot of times trust is about building relationships with communities. And if all scientists look alike, that relationship with the communities is hindered. It's not impossible, but it's hindered. And we must be able to build those relationships. And how do you do that? You do that by having a scientific workforce that's drawing upon all of our talents. The United States is a wonderful, diverse nation. If we are drawing scientists only from one part of our population, how are we supposed to compete with the demographic behemoths that are out there in the world? How do we actually build a scientific workforce that is competitive worldwide? And to do that, we must pull on all parts of our society. And so at AAAS, what we've been doing is, first of all, just looking at ourselves. we don't even know what are the demographics of our organization, especially the parts of the organization that help make new scientists. If you publish in Science Magazine, you're on your way to a successful career in the sciences. If you win a S&T Policy Fellowship from AAAS, you are on your way to a career in science policy. We wanted to make sure what are the demographics of that. So we've started publishing every year. We are going to be publishing our demographics of all of our enabling functions. So for the journals, it's reviewers, it's editors, it's authors. What are the demographics of the individuals who are publishing in science? In the AAAS, it's who are the board of directors, who are the people picking out the fellowships, who are the fellowship winners, what do they look like? And what you immediately see is that in parts of the organization where nominations are the way forward, so for example, the honorary fellows of AAAS, you see that it's not very diverse. But when you look at the application-based parts of AAAS, so the S&T policy fellows, where a student puts in an application, it's remarkably diverse. It looks like America. It looks like Canada. We have got to be able to make sure that we understand the reasons for this, and then we've got to be able to hold ourselves accountable. And only by looking at data can we hold ourselves accountable. And so that's the first step. The second is that we need to make sure that we're advocating for policy positions that enable first-generation scientists, that enable scientists from underrepresented minorities. Just one example of that, you shouldn't need a parental safety net to become a graduate student in the sciences. But if you are a student in Boston and you have parents who've never gone to college, but if you've gone to MIT as a graduate student, you have a very small paycheck. And that paycheck, in the middle of this pandemic, what if one of your roommates went home to stay with their parents? You can't afford your apartment in Boston. And so we have to make sure that we have policies in place that pay graduate students and postdocs enough to actually live, because they're older now than they were when these policies were first created. And we've got to make sure that although it is an apprenticeship, it's learning, that it has some relationship to being an employee. You need maternal and child care. You need the ability to have a family while you are a postdoc, because this is the age that people are at when they're in their postdoc. We need to make sure that we're providing this, because if not, you can't afford to go into the sciences. And frankly, smart students they're going to choose the fields that get them excited and this is a very important can give them a good livelihood. And we need to make sure that we're making that possible for our young scientists.
Well, thank you very much. And Panch, before I turn over to Mehrdad to start getting some questions, if you want to weigh in on the diversity STEM. I know that NSF has been leading the way. So anything you'd like to add?
No, absolutely. I mean, the diversity is an exceedingly important imperative for NSF. We have many programs that emphasizes the importance of diversity. In fact, I would say more recently, I've been engaging a lot with the Black community in terms of understanding. In fact, yesterday I gave a keynote talk on Sunday afternoon to the Society of Black Scientists in order for me to communicate the importance of how much NSF deeply cares about the historic Black colleges and universities and other MSIs, like the Hispanic serving institutions, the tribal colleges, universities, and others, in addition to the mainstream R1 universities also, engaging with a diverse population of students so that we might inspire talent from the socioeconomic spectrum and the geographic spectrum of this nation to be truly representative. I like the way Sudip said it. It's that we should have that to be truly representative of the fabric of this nation. So when we are not there, there is so much more work to be done. If you take women and minorities, I look at the data points in 2020 and where we should be in 2030. In 2020, we are nowhere near the proportion of the demographic of the nation today. So which means that we have at least to double the number of women in science, in STEM disciplines, at least double, right? And the same is true in the case of, in the case of minorities, triple in the case of Hispanics and so on. So I think there is an immediate need, even as we talk about this decade that we are in right now, we have tremendous work to do. And at NSF, what I have challenged my folks to do is to say, let's pilot a lot of programs, because let's not wait for let's not be perfect become the enemy of the good, right? Or good become the enemy of perfect, whichever way it is said. Because we need to pilot as many ideas as possible by listening to the community, so that some may work, some may not. That's okay. Since when has NSF not been a high-risk, high-reward agency? We need to live the message that we are trying to inculcate across this great nation. Therefore, let us try a lot of ideas and quickly then the working ideas, scale them rapidly. And this is something that is very dear to my heart, because my own work in computer science and engineering was centered around how do we ensure that individuals with disabilities have the access to be able to then get their unbelievable talent realized through opportunities. And that's what I want to do across the spectrum of various kinds of diversity that we really need to get up to speed here. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and you can be rest assured that NSF will not only be a leader, but will also be a partner, because this is not just one agency that can get this done. It's agency, that's why I repeat this word partnership, agency working with other agencies who have similar missions and other states and cities who have similar mission too. Because K-12 education is mostly at the state level. How do you partner with states? So that this has to be nurtured right from the K-12, so that when it comes to the higher education aspirations, then you have the pipeline of talent or pathways of talent that enables this progress that has to be made in terms of diversity. So we are working hard at it, and there is much to be done. So this is going to be a great focus for us.
Well, I thank you very much, and I agree. Diversity in STEM is a societal issue. It's not only a problem for the STEM field. It's not an issue for the minority or majority who are underrepresented in STEM. It's for all of us. So thank you so much to both of you for your sensitivity and leadership on this front. And of course, Canada and myself, will be a partner with you. So let's see if we have some, some questions. And if it takes Mehrdad some time to get on, I can just perhaps ask you to maybe think of specific perhaps opportunities for Canada-US. But here's Mehrdad, maybe with some questions.
Thank you, Mona, and thank you, Panch and Sudip, for this fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. There are a number of questions we have already received, and they got some votes already. But I just want to ask participants that they can submit their questions through a box on the top left corner. It says vote, view questions. On the top left corner, we vote, view questions, and you can submit your questions and view them and vote them up if you like. So there are a number of questions. The questions that I read to you have got the highest vote so far. To each of the panelists, what is your personal experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion policies sorry, they're jumping up and down. To each panelist, what is your personal experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, and where you can do more?
Okay. Sudip, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Sudip. So my experiences are at several levels. Let me take the last two roles that I have had, and in the interest of time. I come from a university, Arizona State University, which essentially focused on attracting the socioeconomic demographic of talent that is ripe for higher education opportunities to be afforded to them, to make it accessible by ensuring that nobody is denied access because of lack of resources, namely funding, and that they're able to access the university. And it is not just about bringing the people into the university, but also ensuring that they're successful through the university. So, for example, we noticed that math courses were a killer course for most students in engineering. They would come, and typically the engineering field would be, I'm just taking that as one example, engineering field would be like, on the freshman orientation day, the following statement would be made: look to your right and look to your left, only one of you will make it through the engineering program. Now, this is not an acceptable way of nurturing and inspiring talent and motivating them to be successful. And how do you then take the impediment that people face in math, for example, and how do we design courses that are not one size fits all. With technology today, with learning technologies, you can almost individualize the path of an individual, where you say this person has difficulty in this part of math, and they can go back and do the remedial work with technology helping them, so that we can get better outcomes. And so we use technology and adaptive learning platforms, which essentially turned the success rates from 30 to 40% to 70 to 80%, right? Right where you're able to look at the individual needs and then address them on a case-by-case basis. Now, to the second example that I wanted to give is my own research, which I talked about, Mehrdad, just in the previous question. My own work has been in terms of identifying, how we might build technologies and devices and environments to ensure success of individuals with disabilities. I'm going to take the privilege of sharing a story of one student, if I may, because stories usually have a powerful message. So this is a student who came to me, a freshman, a double major in math and computer science. His name is David Hayden. He came to me and he said, after the freshman year, he's a visually impaired student. He said, Panch, I'm not able to be successful in my math and computer science courses. I am a very, very good student, but I find that when the instructor writes things on the board, when it goes from step 1 to step 10, be an algorithm or a math proof, I'm not able to pay attention, and I feel like I'm being left behind. So I immediately asked him to come and join my lab as an undergraduate research student. I said, who better understands your impediment than yourself? You can design the solution for yourself and others. Then I surrounded him with a number of other people from different disciplines. He designed a device called a note taker, which essentially was a camera connected to a USB interface to a laptop. And he built this wonderful interface of bringing the course content that was not available for him, accessible to him through the camera, into his interface, so that he might then be able to navigate it and learn through that process and control it. And he built a fantastic note taker. I won't go into the details in the interest of time, but I will tell you he submitted his concept to the Microsoft Imagine Cup, which is a worldwide competition of all kinds of ideas at all levels, and he won the world competition among 325,000 entries, right? Just 2 years later. So you can see the power of providing opportunities for people who have the talent, but may face some challenges that we need to work hard at ensuring that we remove them so that that talent can be brought to life. So I feel very passionate about this from my own personal experience, that this can be done, this must be done. And so thank you so much.
That's a great example, Panch. I'll go in the direction of biomedical research and clinical research. Right now we're on the cusp of using gene editing technologies to cure diseases. And this is the most exciting thing in biomedicine, in my opinion. We actually have this opportunity where we may not just treat, but cure disease. And some of the first diseases that may be cured include sickle cell anemia and beta thalassemia, which are, in the United States anyway, diseases that affect Black populations more than white populations. And we need to be able to build trust with the community that they should participate in clinical trials. And what I learned in this outreach is that the best messenger for that is not necessarily the director of the NIH. Francis Collins is a wonderful, wonderful human being. He's not necessarily the right messenger. The right messenger is a scientist who the community trusts and has built a relationship. And where does that relationship start? In the Black community, in churches. Many, many churches are where we actually are working to build relationships, build trust, to overcome frankly, past mistakes. Mistakes like clinical trials that were unethical, frankly, never should have been done. We have to overcome those mistakes. And the only way to do that is by building trust. And so we have scientists at the NIH and in the pharmaceutical industry who are from those communities, of their own communities, who are talking to potential participants in clinical trials to build trust for these wonderful technologies that are coming. But there's another step there. The other step is we must have scientists who are involved in the development of these medicines who come from those communities. And the reason why is then you open up the aperture of what's possible. And at the NIH, the lead scientist on vaccines for COVID is a Black woman who went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, my alma mater, which is why I bring that up. But that being able to point and say, look, this is not about testing in a population because that's an expendable population. This is about testing because this is a population that is at risk. We have to be able to do that in a trustworthy way, and we can only do that if we build relationships, build bridges, and we need to build those bridges before we need them. And so at AAAS, we're working very hard to build those bridges now before we need them. And you know, the fact that we're hopefully going to have a president that's not aiming his fire at scientists will hopefully help that. That will make it much easier to get those messages across.
Thank you.
So, Mehrdad, if I may, I think Sudip also, Mehrdad, if I may. So Sudip,
yes,
you know, brought also a very important point, which is, of course, the diversity, you know, of the scientists, but also the diversity in the science itself, you know, in the research, in the, you know, the subject of the research themselves. And I think this is extremely important. You know, NIH was a leader several years ago in requiring that experiments be done on both, you know, male and female, whether they're animals or humans. And that's still not the case everywhere. Of course, it's, you know, it costs more and everything, but people don't react the same way, you know, and it may be more complicated to do clinical trials on different populations and to do them on, you know, women with different changing hormones, but that's real life. So we want to develop medications and solutions to real life problems, and so we need to have diversity, you know, like really everywhere in the STEM discipline.
Thank you, Mona. Two things. I just want to make sure that I just read the questions and you're still the moderator of the session. Please feel free to weigh in to discuss and allocate the questions to any of the panelists. I am just a facilitator here just to read the questions. That's number one. Number two, with this setting of the screen right now, you can see this is a real fireside chat because Mona is sitting just beside a fire panel. And Mona, you can just point to that. So this is a real fireside chat. We are not just making it up. This is a real one.
You're behind me.
That's right. Okay, good. Okay, the next question is.
Today is off because the temperature in Montreal is actually amazing. It's spring again.
Yes, but for those of you who are not in Canada, we are experiencing, at least in eastern part in Ontario and Quebec, we are experiencing an unusual warm weather for this time of the year, so which is pleasant from our view, but it may not be good for with respect to climate change issues. But the next question is: have you noticed a shift in public opinion regarding scientists during the pandemic, or even later into the pandemic, as the public's attention drifts away? Mona, you can just start off and allocate the question to any of the panelists.
Oh, this is such an easy experiment question. I mean, I'm gonna ask you know, Sudip to start because I know they've been following this, and Panch as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's such an important question. Surveys are telling us, and we've seen surveys both before the pandemic and after and during the pandemic, that people say that they trust scientists. 90%, huge numbers. I see this in data from Research America and data from 3M, State of Science Index. Really, really gratifying. But, and there's a very big but in there. That but is they want science that that aligns with their worldview, and that is troubling. And we all, as scientists, have a lot of work to do. We need to make sure that we're building not just trust in scientists, because having a PhD does not entitle us to trust. Trust comes from relationships. Trust comes from being a part of the community. And we as scientists haven't done enough of that. And so what that's led to is in the 30,000 foot level, yes, I trust scientists. But at the level of decision making, it gets much harder. And so we've got to build that trust. The second thing I would tell you is that we've seen here in the U.S. that people do not necessarily understand the scientific process. And so what's happened is, as the scientific understanding grows, the natural give and take of science that we have come to know, that is not understood by the public at large. And so what ends up happening is, if there's a change in policy, or if there's a change in understanding, that's viewed as a mistake, as a problem. And as scientists, we know that we're constantly evolving our understanding, but watching science get done in real time has not been an educational process for our public. It's actually been detrimental to the scientific stature, and we've got to do a lot of work on that. And I know that NSF is thinking about this. I know that we are certainly thinking about this at AAAS because we see it as a real worry. We do not want science to become aligned only with a worldview. It needs to be across boundaries, and it needs to be broad support and broad understanding.
Panch?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Sudip. I mean, very, very well articulated. I just want to add a dimension to that. I mean, the aspect of trust, right? Trust is something that's not given, it's earned. And we as scientists have this responsibility to earn the trust of public, right? And how do you do that? Now, this pandemic has given the importance of science has come out. Then what we should show is, through science, are we solving problems that actually has an impact on their daily lives? Okay, we have to demonstrate that, and therefore convert that trust that we are getting it implicitly, now turn it into an earned trust, and then continue to build on the trust. So what can we do to further build on the trust? There are several things that we can do. First, solving the problem today, but also I often say that, where is this breakdown, right? So we talk about STEM, and K-12 environments need to be inspiring people in STEM. Fine. So what happens to people who don't necessarily go into STEM? Still, for them, the STEM spark or the scientific spirit is something that people need to be, this is not a good time to say this word, but we need to infect people with the scientific spirit, that whatever they choose to pursue in their careers or their life, that they still feel that science is an important part of their daily living. So we need to demonstrate that. And so how do we do that? And I think higher education has a responsibility here, right? So I often say, where do these teachers come from who we expect to inspire these unbelievable kids? They come to universities to get trained in teachers' colleges. So isn't it our responsibility in higher education then to inspire the teachers first, because they are typically not scientists who go into teaching profession, many of them, some of them do. So even if they are not scientists, how do you make science as part of an inspiration through their process of learning in the universities, that they then, when they go and start to serve as teachers, they are then carrying that scientific spirit and then spreading it among their students, which then starts to build this. So you got to start somewhere and start to build this. And the last component of this, I tell this to all the people at NSF, don't think that because we are doing great science and we know it, and some people who fund know it, and our friends and colleagues know it, that therefore everybody should appreciate it. It is our responsibility to communicate science. And this is where I think what Sudip is doing is phenomenal. It's phenomenal at AAAS in terms of not only through the magazine, but even through other things that Sudip does. They're really carrying the message of science. How can we partner with Sudip and AAAS at NSF? How can we actually take the message of the excitement of science and see how we might use NSF as one platform, again through partnerships, scaling it and multiplying it, one platform of trying to communicate the importance of science to all people, agnostic to where they are and which part of their career path they are and what professions they are. We need to do this more. So we can't sit in this ivory towers and then bemoan the fact that people don't have an understanding of science. The problem is us. We need to take this message and craft this message in bite-sized chunks and inspirational stories that can actually carry this. In fact, I did this thing with Alan Alda recently at a show that he does, a podcast that he does. I will tell you, he's been a tremendous champion of scientific communication. I told Alan, this is the kind of people that we need and ideas that we need at scale everywhere. I believe every university should have a science communication at the highest level of intensity. So we need to do a lot at so many levels in order to build this trust, in order to earn the trust more and actually turn the trust into actually tangible solutions that people can point to and say, I got that problem solved because of science. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, it's back to what we said before, that it's a societal issue, and we need partnership, right, between universities, schools, communicators, and so on. But just back, you know, to the scientific method, because, you know, I too strongly believe that we need to communicate this. And like, how do you communicate what the scientific method is in a sort of dynamic, exciting way with Twitter and Instagram and everything? So I hope you know, you guys at AAAS are looking into that, because that's just like so important. You know, the fact that we keep building, and what is it, you know, what is a credible source of information? What's a credible conclusion? So I don't know, you know, Sudip, if you have ideas, but I think that, you know, we've been all seized by this, and because of a sort of void, you know, we've seen all this disinformation. So, you know, a double pandemic, you know, infodemic, that is accompanying this pandemic. So I think it's been a wake-up call for many of us in the scientific community.
It has, Mona, and doesn't it feel like you know, we're all of similar generations? Doesn't it feel like we are ill prepared for the communication, the speed of communication that's happening today? My scientific friends who are under 30 and who have much larger Twitter followings than I have, and who have, you know, I have friends who work on computing who have themselves followed on Twitch because they want people to see what they're programming as they program. We have scientists who are Instagramming their work. We have scientists who are dancing their PhDs. We have scientists who are this generation of scientists that are coming after us. They are prepared for that battle. They are prepared to engage, because they engage not just with each other at a scientific conference and not just through Science Magazine, but they engage through social media. They engage in their communities, and all the problems of society, we bring them with us into our laboratories. And our under 30 scientists are really driving change. I have to tell you, I get so much optimism when I see junior scientists who are starting out. They're wonderful scientists. They're doing excellent science. They're doing innovative work that's funded by NSF and published in Science Magazine. But then they are also willing to communicate. And they're not waiting to become full professors before they become communicators. They want to engage in policy. They want to engage in communication as junior members of the scientific community. And that gives me tremendous hope, because I think that they really are able to have this, to engage in this battle for the hearts and souls of our society in a way that I'm not ready. You know, my Twitter following is tiny, and my ability to engage is not as good. But we have wonderful programs at AAAS trying to encourage this, and I hope that we can partner around the world on these, because I think they're really important.
You know, Sudip, you make an excellent point.
Yes,
you know, Mona, to your point earlier, you know, the attention span, as you know, of the younger generation is not any more than the Twitter attention span. So which means that if you really want to communicate things to them, you also have to understand that it is not this long story, right? What you want is bite-sized chunks of information which are very impactful. And as Sudip said, the younger generation is much more ready to communicate things in those bite-sized chunks. So I tell people at NSF, if you really want to make an impact, create a 1 second clip, 10 second clip video that can really have an impact. And that's what people are willing to, you know, pay attention to. And then if they want more information, they can always hyperlink to other things. But you need to first get their attention. And so our mode of communication also has to change. And I think, Sudip, you're absolutely right. The younger generation is much more adept at it. And one of the things, again, if we could say, is the more we can sensitize the younger generation when they go through this K-12 as well as higher education experiences, that the importance of communication and how to communicate is something that I think we need to take a lot more seriously, because that's what raises awareness. And this is something that, you know, I say every scientist should know how to communicate. They may not be the best, all of them, but they should know the tools that are required to communicate with. And I think that that would be a great service that I think higher education institutions can do to help, broaden the message being delivered as well as consumed.
Yeah. Mehrdad, do you have more questions for us?
Mehrdad, you are muted.
Thank you for reminding. So yes, there are a number of questions. There is one particular question about science communication we discussed already, but because it got so many votes, and I just want to read it if you have additional insights into that. If not, that's good. But just let me read it for the sake of respecting the vote of the individuals on the Q&A. So for those of us who engage in science communication, the infodemic misinformation and disinformation, which sometimes was perpetuated by politicians, was and is extremely difficult to navigate. What tangible steps are your respective organizations taking to support science communicators, but more importantly, empowering the public with science literacy and critical thinking skills in order to identify misinformation? Thanks. If there is any additional insights, because as you said, we talked extensively.
I think I can speak to the fact that there's many research projects right now that's looking at how might we quell the disinformation at so many levels. So I've seen many projects that even NSF funds in terms of quelling the disinformation, for which I think what is important is, and I think they mentioned this earlier, we have found that such projects require the coming together of social behavioral scientists and scientists, in this case, computing scientists and other scientists, coming together and finding creative solutions for building trustworthiness in whatever we do. For example, our AI institutes have got trustworthiness in AI. So this has become a topic of great interest, but it is a topic that requires interdisciplinary inspirations from humanities, social sciences, and scientists working together to be able to come out with approaches that quells this. And the other thing I would say is, I think people who believe that information needs to be transmitted with a higher level of integrity or fidelity or whatever term you want to use, then we should be bold enough to put them out there too. Oftentimes what we do is we are complaining, but we are not engaging. That's not a good thing. And that's where I find, Science Magazine, again, if I could give kudos to Science Magazine and AAAS for that, because they come out and call it out, and then that raises the awareness. So we all need to do our fair share, not sit in the sidelines and throw darts. Nothing wrong with that. But I think we also need to be part of the solution. And one part of the solution is how might we build more trustworthiness through the approaches that I talked about, but also in terms of engagement, because people do trust the scientists, and therefore the scientists should come out and talk about what they think. And the consumers also need to weigh in all of this with their own understanding and balance this much more. And so I think this requires, it takes a village. So this is going to be something that I think we are all going to be focused a lot more as we move into the future. It's a collective responsibility.
Yeah, it is. And Panch, if I could add to that, NSF is doing a wonderful job of doing the basic research and pulling those disciplines together to make this happen. At AAAS, we're not letting the perfect get in the way of the good. We've got programs that are actively engaging. So let me give you a couple of examples. One is called Sciline, where we have a program that is, reporters and journalists are one mechanism for getting information out. Now, it might be old-fashioned, but they still reach a lot of people. And so we bring them together and we bring them information directly, especially non-science reporters. The audience for this program is not scientific reporters; it's reporters at local newspapers and local television stations. So, for example, when the pandemic just started back in March, we had Peggy Hamburg not talk to CBS News or NBC News or CNN. We had her talking to local outlets, so local television stations, where people are more likely to actually trust their local broadcaster than they are either Fox or CNN. And so we reached 2 million people in that way through local television broadcasts. And so this is one method. We also reach out to seminarians. So in the religious community, we know that if we build a relationship first, that then whenever a pandemic hits, we can say something like, it's not a good idea to sing in a choir right now, and that's trusted and not seen as an attack on religion. And that only happens through building these relationships. I know it's old-fashioned, but building relationships with influencers, whether they be influencers on social media or influencers in church, they matter. They matter, and we're trying to build those relationships.
Excellent point, Sudip.
I think, Sudip, one of the things you said is really very important also, to engage locally. So I think that very often what I've seen, and I'm sure you guys also have seen, Panch, you were vice president at Arizona State University, great university, by the way, in terms of embracing interdisciplinarity and so on. But we do something that is a public panel, but we do it at the university instead of doing it at your local municipal space, library, a train station, what have you. And I think that we need to be where the public is. So a few years back, when people were still traveling, and when Toronto Pearson Airport was one of the busiest in the nation, some colleagues from the University of Toronto actually, put very nice posters, images of science explaining what they are, like everywhere where you were walking at the Pearson's Airport. And I think, it's like we need everything, right? And right now we need to really sort of serve on all this interest that the public is showing for science, and just seize all opportunities with the community, with the local groups to engage. And it's important for the pandemic. It's important for other issues that we need to be facing in the world, from climate change, to the next pandemic.
Excellent point, Mona. Absolutely.
So, Mehrdad? Yeah.
Yes.
Other questions, Mehrdad?
Yes. So there is another question, switch gears a bit. In your opinion, what is the climate for evidence-based decision-making, and how has it been impacted by COVID-19?
Well, I can start maybe by saying that it's a double-edged sword. Certainly in Canada, the government has been really, wanting to follow the science and the evidence. Of course, it puts a lot of pressure on, providing and translating the evidence into what it can mean, for policy in real time. So I think it's it's interesting because again, it's a dialogue in terms of the scientists understanding the issues that the decision makers have to make, that policy has to address, and for the policymakers to formulate the appropriate questions to the scientists. Because science doesn't tell us whether we should open or close the borders. It can tell us only what happens to the virus across a border or something like this, and then so on. So I think it's a very interesting also learning to communicate between these two communities, even when the will is there. So over to you, colleagues in the US.
So I could probably take a tack at it. I mean, at NSF, as you know, we are funding projects that are precisely around how do you gather evidence-based by your work. How do you gather evidence so that then informs your decision making? Let me give you two examples of projects that will probably give you some, that will probably interest you. Let me put it this way. So there's one project which we launched a number of grant mechanisms. We funded about 1,000 grants to the tune of $173 million in terms of COVID-related projects, right? So we were fortunate to have $75 million from the CARES Act, and then we added more from our own internal NSF funds so that we might focus this on the COVID pandemic. So let me give you an example of one project which you would think that is, from an investment perspective, is a smaller scale investment, a $200,000 project. This project was led by a Nobel laureate, Abhijit Banerjee from Harvard, and he did this with his colleagues as a project in West Bengal, a state in India, and 2.5 million people that were given messages, voice messages and text messages coming from Abhijit Banerjee, explaining the importance of wearing masks, social distancing, washing hands, etc. They did control groups, and there are different combinations of messages. And they looked at the group that was not given these messages and looked at the adherence to some of these practices, right? And it turned out that, of course, when they got this from trusted person, which they all trust, a Nobel laureate, which is originally from their home state, and therefore they trusted this person, and the adherence was shown to be very high. Not only were they adhering to the specific things that were given in the message, they did more than that. Like, for example, if the message was wash your hands and wear your mask, they also maintained social distance. In other words, what they did was they not only adhered to the message it was given, they overall trusted the messages that were being sent out, right? When this goes back to the previous question, trustworthiness, right? So then the same project then brought back home and said, how might we take African-American communities and Hispanic communities and take an African-American physician and a Hispanic physician communicating messages to people, and therefore they got a much higher level of adherence, right? So these are actually evidence-based approaches to seeing how people can react to things like the pandemic and have positive outcomes. That's one set of projects that you can think about, which is actually a social behavioral sciences project, which is an exceedingly important part of how we need to navigate the future, right? Now, the other project, which is very exciting, is, in 2009, when the SARS H1N1 came about, we had funded a project at UC San Diego. Romy Ramaro is the name of this PI, and she modeled the H1N1 virus, 160 million atom model in our high performance computing framework at that time, and that was called Blue Waters. And so she built this program and modeled this whole thing. Now comes the COVID pandemic. She quickly now pivots her work into the COVID pandemic in our new high performance computing framework called Frontera, and has an international collaboration with people from Ireland and other countries. And this was a project that was funded in the past, gathering evidence of how to model viruses, now being able to quickly translate and do this for the COVID pandemic. So what happens is, the more you think about it, and that's why I tell NSF right now, we need to think about what are the portfolio of resilience related activities that we need to be thinking about now, not wait for something like a pandemic to happen, so that we might be more prepared. Like the Romy Ramaro was almost accidental, you could call it that way. But I don't want it to be accident. I want to be intentional. So what can we do more? So this is how you try to, as an agency, what we can do is build more evidence-based projects and show that the outcomes really matter. And that way you can build more trust, and it ties to the previous question. So hope this response was useful for you.
Punch, I think that...
And Sudip, no, for sure, Pan, I think this is very important, about needing to continue accumulating the evidence, which speaks to discovery science and the basic science that will be the evidence for the next crisis, or for the next innovation, for that matter.
Exactly.
But I was just wondering whether, Sudip, you want to speak about taking it from that level and into the hand of the policymakers as well, because you have some experience there, of course, in the present role and the previous one.
Yeah, this is the challenge of our time, right? To get, how do you incorporate science into policy making in a way that doesn't overemphasize the science, but doesn't underemphasize the science? And we've been hit or miss, right? So if you look at it, one of the hardest things about this pandemic is a scientist walking into a governor's office or into the president's office or into a mayor's office and saying, look, I know right now only 3 people have this virus, but if you follow this model, then we're going to have a lot more. And so we have to do something today. And it's very difficult for the mayor to say, yes, I want to close bars in my city because there's 3 people that have this virus. And yet we know, it's just a matter of time before this spread will happen. And then we'll be in a place where it won't matter anymore, because we'll have thousands of people that have the virus. And that has been very challenging. And in the United States, because we do have this very decentralized set of decision making, we've seen some cities where it worked and some cities where it didn't. And you can compare and you can contrast and you can see where the virus is under control and where it's not. And so we have to build upon both these successes and these failures. We've got to be able to point out how science can make a difference in policymaking. It's not the only factor. When I worked in Congress, and I know Mona and Pont, I know you see this all the time. People look at politicians and they think, they're not very smart. Most politicians I know are very, very smart, and they have to balance so many different pieces of evidence, not just the science. And we as scientists must make sure that we are able to show when we are talking about something that is a scientific, not just a possibility, but a most likelihood. And when we are talking about something that's beyond the scientific data and we're getting our scientific opinion, we've got to be able to tell the difference and then participate in the process in a way that is meaningful. And I think that this happens best actually at the local level. I've seen it happen best at the local level. Right now, it's for all the world to see that the United States, with all of our best public health work in my opinion, in the world, we failed miserably. We failed miserably with the public health response to COVID. But at the state and local level, there are differences in how response happened. We need to make sure we understand that, and then we need to make sure that we're making the case to politicians and policymakers around the country to show when this works ahead of time. And it's not an easy thing, and it requires great communication, and it requires people that politicians trust, like Punch, to make that happen. So we have a lot of work to do amongst us.
Yeah.
Okay,
and you're
Mona,
right,
if I may,
requires trust, and you cannot build. Yes, go ahead, Mehrdad.
No, please go ahead. Your turn.
I was just gonna say that you can't build trust in the midst of the pandemic, right? And this is why we need to have this continuous dialogue between science and policy, so that when it's time to listen to each other's, we do it. And I think also what this pandemic has taught us in terms of both science and science advice is humility. That's, I think we need to be providing our advice and doing our science with utmost humility as well. So it's not a macho game, if I can say this. Mehrdad, over to you.
Excellent point.
Mona, thank you. Punch, go ahead. Do you want to say something?
I would say excellent point, Mona. You made an excellent point. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. That's right. Okay, that's good. So we are left, there are a number of questions, but in terms of the topics, I want to read them. There are 3 questions that we can read, but we have only 8 minutes or 9 minutes left from our session. I want to ask you, please, no more than 4 minutes to reply to each question, and even less than that would be great. So the first 2 questions is about the same thing. It's about the younger generation and scientists who want to come to policymaking. As leaders in science, what would be your recommendation to university science graduates? That's number 1. And along the same line, how can scientists make their way into policy leadership, especially in transition now for the US government? So the same question, no more than 4 minutes.
I will let Sudip go.
Okay. I think this is an exciting time for young scientists. As I was saying earlier, what gives me hope and what gives me optimism is I see young scientists wanting to participate in policy right while they're in graduate school, while they're in postdoc, and while they're young assistant professors. And I encourage that. Particularly, you don't have to come to Washington to be participating. Frankly, in Arizona, in Alaska, in North Carolina, it's much better if the scientific help is coming locally rather than me or Punch flying there. They would much rather see someone from the University of North Carolina or Arizona State or from the University of Alaska providing scientific help and guidance. So first, my number 1 piece of advice is to participate now. Participate locally. Participate in your local school board. There are scientific questions being asked at every level of government. If you want to get involved at the national level, I encourage you. AAAS has S&T policy fellowships. I encourage you to prepare for those. Come to our website. I'd be happy to tell you more about that. I want to be careful on time, but we are very much, I believe strongly that it's going to take thousands of individuals having these conversations. It is not about one organization or one government agency making this better. It is about individual scientists at every level participating.
I mean, that's an excellent point, Sudip. Not much to add other than the fact that I would second the fact that it is an exciting time for science. And again, when we talked about evidence-based as well as inspirations of science being shared, then people will get the confidence that science is an exciting future, has got an exciting future. And then you talk about the stories and examples of people who are doing so well. And we need to go back and anchor to those kinds of things and not be pessimistic at all. This is a time for tremendous optimism, not pessimism at all. That's the first thing. Second thing, to the policy thing, to add to Sudip, what Sudip said, I think universities these days are emphasizing the importance of science policy in their own institutions as a sort of a focus area that needs to be strengthened even more, because when we bring people out into the real world, some of them need to be either, as I said, touched by science policy kind of inspirations, even if they are, not necessarily pursuing science policy as a career, but then also having career pathways for science policy through the programs that universities offer. So the university that I came from had a very strong program on science policy, which I think serves the nation better. And then, as Sudip said, the local contexts are exceedingly important too.
You're on mute, Mehrdad. What's your second question?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so the second question is what merits does the panel see in international collaboration, and how important this will be in building back better for the pandemic? So given the composition of the panel, I think this is a very appropriate question.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Maybe I can take that first, because I came out of, as I said, a 6 a.m. call with science advisors across the globe. The pandemic has really given us a tremendous chance to converge our ideas together and see the impact that we can create, right? And let me take Canada, because we are now talking about Canada. And I'm so thrilled that Mona Nemer is the chief science advisor, a tremendous scientist of repute that understands what it takes to build these global coalitions, and already have reached out to the United States and building the strong collaboration. And then we have Alejandro Adam, who shares like me. He's just the flip side of me, right? He trained in the US and went to Canada. I trained in Canada and came to the US. So we have stories that we share that are highly synergistic of different types. And we have talked about how we might work in AI, how we might work in quantum, how we might work in smart and connected communities. There are so many areas that we come together. Of course, our existing collaborations in the area of Arctic work that we do together. I mean, I can go on and on, the centers of excellence that we work on. I think, the time now is to scale. As I said, this is now a time to speed and scale and strengthen global partnerships, because I think if there is a time that global partnerships are important, it is now.
Panch, I can add.
Yeah, and I will just add that just because, we're not traveling and the planes are not flying doesn't mean that, we are not or should not be collaborating. On the contrary, I think the pandemic has shown us that by collaborating, we can go much faster. We can tackle complex, questions. And with respect to Canada and the US, I'm glad, Panch, you mentioned that actually there is no brain drain and brain gain, since we're continue working together and being, friends across the artificial border. But I can say, from Canada's perspective, that the world is reaching out more, not less. The collaborations in areas that require also big infrastructure. We talked about quantum computing. We talked about cyclotrons, lasers, genomics. As we speak right now, there is an international collaboration for the sequencing of all the viral genomes for SARS-CoV-2. So I think that, on the contrary, I really see a bright future, and people like Panch and Sudip, myself, of course, the granting agency president in Canada. Our role is to facilitate this. To facilitate it for the researchers and to facilitate it for the country. But Sudip, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. This is terrible about these virtual things. It's not as good as in person. I didn't mean to be impolite.
Oh, no problem at all. No problem at all.
Please go ahead.
I was just going to, I agree with both of you, and I think that you are both just world-class leaders in this, and that's terrific. I think that there's both an opportunity and a worry for me. The opportunity is just as you state, the tremendous growth that's possible. The worry for me is that we are developing these parallel systems. The Western democracies have for a long time made mistakes in science and then learned from those mistakes and built a wonderful culture of science. Now other nations are joining us at the forefront of that science, whether it's China, whether it's India, elsewhere around the world. People have seen that model and they're investing. We need to make sure that global culture of science pulls in those mistakes that we made and that we learn from those, because I don't want to see the day when the next crisis hits that the young scientist in Palo Alto isn't feeling like they can call the scientist in Winnipeg who might call the scientist in Beijing. They need to know one another, they need to be able to work together, and they need to solve the problems for us that are going to come. The COVID is the first of many.
Exactly.
Okay, and the next question, last question, is perhaps for our colleagues in the US especially, but Mona, of course, your insights. How do you think the science landscape will change with a new administration in the US?
Mehrdad, I'm sorry, is it how will science policy change with the change of administrations in the US?
How the science landscape will change with a new administration in the US?
Yeah, why don't I take that one? One of the things that I think is really hard for people who are outside that environment to take in is that there's $170 billion worth of federal investment in science this past year. That is 20% more than it was 5 years ago. We're growing at a fast rate. That's happened under both types of administrations. But the big differences are at the top, the messaging from the top. And I can be perhaps more frank here than most. The messaging has been poor. We have not done a good job of maintaining international collaborations. We've said that we are worried about immigration. We've said that we're worried about the loss of intellectual property. The loss of intellectual property is a worry, but frankly, it shouldn't be an end, and it shouldn't be the reason why we cut ourselves off to the world. And so I think that with this change of administration, I think you will see an openness to more science. I think you will see, with the pandemic, you will see public health experts more at the table in relationship to the pandemic. And I think that you will see, but from both sides of the aisle, this push for more scientific investment. So I am hopeful that it's good for scientific collaboration internationally, and I'm hopeful that the messaging from the top becomes different. Tony Fauci should never be called an idiot, and that is just wrong. I will not accept it, and as a member of the scientific community, I will fight it no matter who says it. And I'm glad to see that. I think we'll have a president next year that won't say that.
If I can just say one thing, and far from me to meddle into anything in the U.S., but I do want to to highlight the fact that other than the historic, of course, presence of a vice president-elect, Kamala Harris, who had the great opportunity to actually do her high school in Montreal, my city. And she is the daughter of a great biochemist and cell biologist. So I'm certain that something has rubbed in there. And of course, President-elect Biden, his wife is an educator. So I think that also sends, at least to some of us, a comforting message about the understanding from the top. And I think, like you've mentioned, Sudip, the politicians, I don't envy them these days. They have to juggle so many priorities, such a difficult, landscape to navigate. But I think having that sensitivity to science and some understanding goes a long way. So, Mehrdad, I think that with this, perhaps our time is up. And we do have to wrap up. This is fascinating. We can go on, I guess, for many hours. But thank you so much for agreeing to be with us, Panch, Sudip, and Mehrdad, for giving us, the opportunity to have this great chat. So I very much look forward to the time when we're going to be able to meet in person, and I definitely look forward to the next meeting of AAAS and of CSPC as well in 2021. Let's hope that we would have, I have no doubt we will overcome the virus. The question is when. So let's put all our energy together in collaboration to fight it and to win that fight. Thank you very much again, and thanks for the audience who has been with us and the great questions we received. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Mona, Sudip, and
Thank you
Mehrdad.
very much.
Fantastic.
Thank you all.
There is a survey will pop up. If you could please take a moment to fill out the survey. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all.